Hello and welcome to this legendary lecture. We'll be going deep into the Central Andean highlands of present-day Colombia before the whole genocide of South America. And we'll be going into an area today known as the Altiplano Cundiboyacens. Growing up, I experienced much of the things experienced by children in the 80s and 90s, one of which was the VHS tape. And since childhood, I have had a love for DreamWorks. And one of the films that I was obsessed with and still is obsessed with is The Road to El Dorado, a film about two Spanish con men who manipulate people of El Dorado into thinking that they are gods in order to steal their gold. And on the right-hand side, you have my all-time favorite game, Pitfall: The Lost Expedition. And that game is about the titular character Pitfall Harry, as he rescues not only a expedition that fell when a plane crashed, and he needs to go rescue all the members of the expedition. He also needs to save El Dorado from a evil high priest and help the princess of El Dorado do so. Now, before we begin, let me first explain what a legend is. A legend is a semi-true story which has been passed on from person to person and has important meaning or symbolism for the culture in which it originates. A legend usually includes an element of truth or is based on historic fact but with mythical qualities. Now, for me, that last sentence basically sums up a Hollywood historical movie. And there's an upcoming historical movie called Napoleon by Apple TV. And as you see on screen, we have Napoleon's expedition in Egypt, and this scene depicts the Battle of the Pyramids. Now, for those who know the history of Napoleon in Egypt, will know that the Battle of the Pyramids did not take place at the foot of the pyramids, but in fact took place 9 miles from it. They could hardly see it. And this is basically a legend because had Napoleon or the British not wrote down that the Battle of the Pyramids took place 9 miles away, we all would have assumed it took place as depicted in this screenshot of the trailer for Napoleon. Now, as I mentioned in the explanation of the term legend, there did exist a place like El Dorado, but not El Dorado. So, what was it? Well, in this lecture, we'll be exploring in the first half the Muisca people and how they inspired the legend of El Dorado. And we'll go through their culture, their way of life, religion, their leaders, as well as their conquistadors. And in the second half of the lecture, we'll go through the legend and the search for this lost golden city of El Dorado. So, as I mentioned, the legend of El Dorado is based on the Muisca people of Colombia. The Muisca people are an indigenous people and culture of the Altiplano Cundiboyacens and formed the Muisca Confederation before the Spanish arrived. And these people spoke a form of Chipcan language that forms part of the Chipcan language called Muiscaba. And these Muiscas people were incredibly rich. And as you can see here, we have the top half, we have 3 modern photos of Muisca people. The 2 bottom left are more modern pictures, and then we have a family-friendly version of a very famous picture of Muisca people. Now, the Muisca territory spanned about 25,000 square kilometers from the north of Boyaca to the Sumapax Paramo, and from the summits of the western portion of the eastern summits to the western portion of the eastern ranges of the Andes Mountain. And their territory bordered a couple of other tribes. The Muizos is the most famous one of them all, which was a arch enemy of the Muisca people. You have Cuanes, Chinabos, Achaguas, Tecuas, Guayapes, Sudagaos, and Panches. And as you can see on the bottom of the Muisca territory, we have the green part, and that is the territory of the Zipa. A bit more on him in a moment. The red part is the independent territory. They had no leader like the green and yellow territory. In the yellow territory, we had the Hoa, the Zakwe. And the Zakwe and the Zipa were the two kings or chiefs of the Muisca Confederation. Now, the legend of El Dorado started with the Zipa rulers. The Zipa, other than ruling, was given the responsibility of offering gold to the gods. The Zipa would cover himself with gold and float on a royal barge to the middle of the sacred lake Guaravida, where he would offer up golden trinkets. And there is no better quote than the following one describing what this ritual is. And that's by Jesse Jennings. Quote, the El Dorado tale derives from the investiture ceremony of the Muisca rulers. The new chief was coated in gold dust and taken on a raft to the center of the sacred lake, Guaravida. At sunrise, when the light struck his golden body, the chief would dive into the lake, thus washing the gold off, and would emerge as a human ruler born from the divine golden sun. Music, shouting, and then tossing of large quantities of gold into the lake accompanied this ceremony. And this is a very famous picture of a very famous artifact, the Muisca raft, found in a cave in 1969 by explorers. Now, this is a very small raft, or a very small artifact, and you will see how small in just a second. But before we get to that, let's quickly look at more detailed pictures. This is from the front of the feet of the figures on the raft. We have a image of the back of the raft. And just remember, this was crafted by hand. They didn't have machines. Here we have a picture of the banner behind the chief, the Zipa. On the right-hand side, we have a rower. And here we have on the left-hand side, we have the continuation of the Zipa banner. And on the right, we have the priest conducting the ceremony. And here's an image of how small it is. It is incredibly small. You could hold it in one hand. Obviously, this scientist is holding it with both his hands, not break it, but that is incredibly small and very detailed for something that was crafted by hand. So now let's get to the rulers of the Muisca Confederation. First, we'll start with the northern parts, where the Hoas ruled. And first off, we had Hoa Hunzahua. His reign started at an unknown period of time and ended in 1470. And he found the city of Hunza, which is now called Tinya. And Hunza was, in fact, the capital city of the Hoa in the northern part. Next up, we have Hoa Mikua. Hoa Mikua started his reign in 1470, ending it in 1490, about 20 years later. And he died in the Battle of Chaconta, which was part of a Muisca civil war against the Zipa in the southern part of the Muisca Confederation. Next up, we have Hoa Katoka, who started his reign in 1490, ending it in 1537. And he ruled the Northern Territory when the Spanish arrived in modern-day Colombia. Finally, we have Hoa Aquemenzakwe, started his reign in 1537, ending 2 years later in 1539, and he was, in fact, the last Hoa ruler Now let's get to the more famous ones. The Zipa. Zipa Makakua, and he started his reign in 1450, ending it in 1470. And according to legend, slept with a snake. And let's hope that was the only thing he did with that poor snake. Next up, we have Zipa Suguamanchika, who started his reign in 1470 and ending it in 1490, about 20 years later. And he died in the Battle of Chikonta, which was part of a Muisca civil war. Next up, we have Zipa Nemekwene, who started his reign in 1490, ending it in 1514. And Nemekwene introduced the very brutal Nemekwene Code. And Bishop Lucas Fernandez de Pedrita wrote in the 17th century about punishment against incest. Quote, when a man committed incest with his mother, daughter, sister, or niece, he would be thrown in a narrow pit filled with water where crawling bug would be thrown in. The pit was covered with a slab and the victim died a horrible death. So he was basically eaten alive. And now we have Zipatisque Susa, who started his reign in 1514, ending it in 1537. And he ruled when the Spanish arrived in modern-day Colombia. And finally, we have Zipa Sagipa, who started his reign in 1537, ending it 2 years later in 1539. And he was the last Zipa Muisca ruler. Now that we are finished with the Hawa and the Zipa, let's get to the religious figures of the Muisca Confederation. Chimanigagua was basically their Zeus, their Ra, their Odin, and he was the supreme being, omnipotent God and creator of the world. Chimanigagua was the static deity who ruled over all the gods, who was never praised directly, but through the lesser gods of the sun, moon, and fertility. And when the Spanish arrived, they described the Muisca people as the children of the sun. On the right-hand side, we have a image of a tuño, and this image is of a tuño of a mother with a child in her arms made from gold. And fortunately, children were sometimes sacrificed to Chimanigagua. Next up, we have Chia, a triple lunar deity who represented fertility of the earth and people. Chia and Sue, which we'll get to next, were the first generation of deities created by Chimanigagua, in which they both illuminated light for earth. And Chia and Sua are married, but separated in the sky most of the time until Chia would join her solar deity husband, creating a lunar eclipse. And on the right, we have a picture of the statue of Chia in Chia, Colombia. Sue was the god of the sun, and he was married to Chia, as mentioned. And he was very important to agriculture. Sue was worshipped in the temple of the sun in Sugamuxi, currently known as Sogamoso, the city of the sun. And other temples attributed to Sue were in Bacata and Guaravida. And the original sun temple in Sogamoso was destroyed by torch fires when the Spanish arrived. And on the right-hand side, we can see a replica built of that temple in Sugamoso. Bahue was the mother goddess, and she emerged from the waters in the Ikakwe lake, the baby in her arms, and he grew up to be her husband and populated the earth. And now I can just feel what Nemekwene thought when he heard that one of the goddesses he needs to pray to had incest, an incestual relationship. So I believe Nemekwene might have been an atheist just because of this. Well, the history of Bahue was mentioned by the Spanish chronicler Pedro Simón in his book Noticias Historiales, where he wrote that the indigenous people also called her Urakohua, which is Chitka, or the good woman, and worshipped her as one of their main deities. Simon also mentioned that the Muisca believed that Bahue sometimes came back from the underworld to guide her people. Next up, we have Bojica, who is the messenger of and holy teacher of the Muisca. He was the founding hero of the civilization, and he brought them morals and law. In the religion of the Muisca people, Bojica created the Tequendama Falls, a waterfall west of southern capital of Bacata. Next up, we have Oitaka, a rebel goddess, and she was the goddess of happiness, sexual liberation, and the moon. And according to legend, Oitaka was a goddess of extreme beauty who praised the life of joy, games, pleasure, and drunkenness, and who rebelled against Bojica. And because of this, he turned her into a white owl. Some chroniclers, though, state that Hoitaka was another name for the moon goddess Chia. And now we have some four minor gods. Chikukum was the god of rain and thunder. Chukavira, the god of the rainbow. Chakwin, god of sport and fertility. And Ninkatakoa, the god of arts and dance. So the earliest Muisca radiocarbon dates back all the way to the 6th century AD from the charcoal found in gold artifacts. This means that these Muisca people have been around since the end of the classical antiquity. And when the soldiers of their conquistador Gonzalo Jimenez de Quesada entered their territory, they found roughly 1,000,000 Muiscas. Quesada's men systemically occupied one town after another, easily subduing warriors armed only with wooden swords and shields and javelin-like spears. And unfortunately, well, fortunately for the Spanish, the Muiscas, unlike their neighbors, didn't have poison-tipped arrows and spears. And in the Pagoda Valley, when the Spaniards arrived there, they found so many magnificent buildings, houses, and palaces of wood that Quesada named the area Valley de los Alcazares, meaning the Valley of the Castles. Here we have four of them. On the bottom right, on the bottom left, we have the replica of the Temple of the Sun in Sugamoso. And the top left, we have El Infernito, center of religious ceremonies and spiritual purification rites, as well as serving as an astronomical observatory. On the top right, we have Nzahua Well, a well named after the first Hoa, Hoa Hunzahua, and I believe that well is currently on a university campus in Colombia. And on the bottom, you have the Cojines del Zaque. The Cojines are two round stones used in the religion to worship Sue and Chia. Now, independent Muisca farmers raised corn, tomatoes, manioc, beans, cocoa, various fruits, and potatoes, a novelty to the Spaniards. And it's said by Cesar de Leon that, quote, when cooked, it is as soft as boiled chestnuts, unquote. Unfortunately, the Muiscas lacked pack animals and wheeled vehicles. So they carried their items on foot to neighboring tribes and trade fairs, and the priest Pedro Simon wrote of bazaars held every 4 days, where people of various provinces and nations exchanged goods, including gold, for which, ironically, the Muiscas lacked a natural resource. So the people that inspired the Legend of El Dorado didn't even have gold on them. Now, let's get to what you all came here for, the Legend of El Dorado. We now know the where, how, and when of the legend, but let's get into what it is. El Dorado has served as the white whale for hundreds of treasure hunters. Legend has it that El Dorado was brimming with riches, the likes of which the world had never seen. Everything from the city walkways to the buildings, temples, and homes were made from solid gold. El Dorado was said to be an incomprehensibly rich place. People lived a life of luxury, a perfect life. El Dorado was a golden utopia, and many Europeans wanted it for themselves. Now, the legend of El Dorado first started as a man called the Golden Man, because El Dorado means the golden. Where did they get this idea? Well, the zipper covered in gold going into Lake Barravida. In the mid-16th century, poet, priest, and historian Juan de Castellanos wrote the following poem about the ritual. An alien Indian hailing from afar, who in the town of Quito did abide, and neighbor claimed to be of Bagara. They having come, I know not by what way, did with him speak and solemnly announce a country rich in emeralds and gold, also among us the things which them engaged. A certain king, he told of, who, disrobed, upon a lake was wont, aboard a raft, to make oblations as himself had seen, his regal form overspread with fragrant oil, on which was laid a coat of powdered gold, from sole of foot unto his highest brow, resplendent as the beaming of the sun. Arrivals without end, he further said, were there to make rich votive offerings, golden trinkets and of emeralds rare, and divers other of their ornaments, and worthy credence these things he affirmed. The soldiers, light of heart and well content, then dubbed him El Dorado, and the name, by countless ways, was spread throughout the world. But this legend quickly turned from a golden man to a golden city. The year is 1537. The Spanish conquistador Jimenez de Quesada and his army of 900 soldiers are searching for a route to Peru. Suddenly, word of a golden city reaches them, so Quesada changes their destination. They track deeper and deeper into the South American wilderness. Hundreds die along the way, until finally they happen upon a sight that left them stunned. What they found was an El Dorado, but the gold work of the Muisca tribe. These golden carvings were new and exotic to them. What likely startled them even more was the sheer abundance of the gold on the site. The Muiscas, like other South American indigenous tribes, were a gold working culture, and gold for them was not about monetary value, but a spiritual connection to the gods. The Spanish, however, felt differently and plundered the tribe's ancient treasure. Over the following years, Spain conquered the tribe's lands, but still none could find El Dorado. Yet that didn't stop countless others from searching for it over the years. With more and more expeditions invading Muisca territory, and they oppressed the people even more. Ironically, the relentless search for El Dorado by the conquistadors and explorers essentially destroyed it, as it was the culture of the Muiscas that inspired this legend. The first recorded expedition for the sole purpose of finding El Dorado was done by German conquistador Ambrosius Eyinger in July 1529. This expedition was a failure, and in 1533 Ambrosius was shot with a poisoned arrow and died. And after this, a man who survived Ambrosius's expedition, called Georg von Speyer, led another expedition with the same goal in mind. Unlike Ambrosius, Georg survived the expedition, but embarked into the jungle with over 2,000 men, and only 80 of them exited the jungle. In 1537, Lake Guaravita was, quote-unquote, discovered by González Jiménez de Quesada. He had heard that this was where tons of gold was dumped by the Muisca people in honor of their gods and Zipa. And in 1545, conquistadors Lazaro Fonte and Hernan Perez de Quesada, the other Quesada's brother, drew up plans to drain the lake and steal all the gold beneath the water. They enslaved the local population and forced them to manually drain the lake using buckets. After 3 months of this, they finally drained the lake just by 3 meters. But those 3 meters revealed a total of $100,000 of today's money worth of gold. 15 years later, in 1552, another attempt was made to drain Lake Guaravita by Bogota businessman Antonio de Sepulveda, and he financed a notch to be carved in the rim of the lake to further drain the water. As you can see on the screen, we have an arrow pointing towards a image of the notch in Lake Guadavida. And this caused the water level to drop by 20 meters, and it showed them $400,000, today's money, worth of gold. But this was the last time that the lake was drained, as in 1965, the government of Colombia banned any attempt to drain the lake in search of the potential $300 million of gold left beneath the waters. Now, before we get to the next expedition, let's quickly look at Lake Parim. Unlike Lake Guadavida, Lake Parim was a legendary lake and was thought to be the exact location of the city after they gave up with the Muiscas. Repeated attempts to find this lake failed to confirm its existence, and it was dismissed as a myth along with the city. The search for Lake Parim led explorers to map the rivers and other features of southern Venezuela, northern Brazil, and southwestern Guyana before the lake's existence was definitely disproved in the early 19th century. Some explorers propose that the seasonal floodings of the Rupununi savanna may have been misidentified as a lake. Recent geological investigations suggest that a lake may have existed in northern Brazil, but it dried up sometime in the 18th century. Skipping a few years, we come to the year 1595, the year of the most famous El Dorado expedition, the expedition of Walter Ridley. Walter Ridley was an English statesman, soldier, writer, and explorer, and one of the most notable figures in the Elizabethan era. He played a huge role in the English colonization of North America, suppressed an Irish rebellion, and helped defeat the Spanish Armada. With England at war with Spain in 1585, English privateers had set out to raid Spanish and Portuguese possessions, and shipping conduct illicit trading. So Walter Raleigh had enjoyed several years of high esteem from Queen Elizabeth I, which stemmed in part from his previous exploits at sea, which included the famous capture of the Madre de Dios. Soon after, however, Raleigh suffered a short imprisonment for secretly marrying one of the Queen's ladies in waiting, Elizabeth Throckmorton, and bearing her a child. And in a bid to restore his influence with the Queen, Raleigh, having promised a gold-rich empire more lucrative than Peru, had set up an expedition under John Whiddon to find the fabled city of gold known as El Dorado, following one of the many old maps which indicated the putative existence of the city. Raleigh aimed to reach Lake Parim in the highlands of Guyana, the supposed location of the city at the time. And he was encouraged by the account of Juan Martinez, believed to be Juan Martinez de Albajur, who had taken part in the Pedro de Silva's expedition in the area in 1570, only to fall into the hands of the Caribs of the lower Orinoco. Martinez claimed he was taken to the Golden City in blindfold, was entertained by the natives, and then left the city and couldn't remember how to return. In all honesty, I think he maybe ate some mushrooms, just looked in the wide open space of the jungle, gasping at air, seeing a golden city, and then when he got back to his people, they just hit him over the head saying, "You've been gone away for a few minutes." And he disappeared from the records after this incident, and many believe he might be currently in El Dorado, waiting for someone to find him just so that he can prove himself right. Now, Raleigh had set many goals in this expedition. Firstly, he genuinely believed he would find El Dorado, but it was actually called Manoa instead of El Dorado. Second, he hoped to establish an English presence in the southern hemisphere that could compete with that of the Spanish. His third goal was to create an English settlement in the land called Guyana and to try to reduce commerce between the natives and Spaniards. In 1596, Raleigh sent his lieutenant, Lawrence Keymis, back to Guyana in the area of the Orinoco River to gather more information about the lake and the Golden City. During his exploration of the coast between the Amazon and the Orinoco, chemists mapped the location of the American Indian tribes and prepared geological, geographical, and botanical reports of the country. Chemist described the coast of Guyana in detail in his relation of the second voyage to Guyana, published in 1596, and wrote that indigenous people of Guyana traveled inland by canoe and land passages towards a large body of water on the shores which he supposed was located Manoa, the golden city of El Dorado. Though Riley never found El Dorado, he was convinced that there was some fantastic city whose riches could be discovered, and finding gold in the riverbanks and in the villages only strengthened his resolve. Unfortunately, in 1617, he returned to the New World on a second expedition, this time with Kemys and his son, Wat Riley, to continue his quest for El Dorado. However, Riley, by now an old man, stayed behind in a camp on the island of Trinidad. Wat Riley was unfortunately killed in a battle with Spaniards, and Kemys subsequently committed suicide. Upon Raleigh's return to England, King James I ordered him to be beheaded for disobeying orders to avoid conflict with the Spanish. He was executed in 1618. Now, does El Dorado exist? Absolutely not. Do I believe it exists? Yes, 100%. Now, why, you might wonder? The answer lies in the magical abilities of El Dorado to keep a very cherished part of my childhood alive. And I end off this lecture with a quote from the lyrics of the song We Are from the anime One Piece. Quote unquote, that legendary place that the end of the map reveals is only legendary until someone proves it real. Thank you for listening.